Morning, YouTube America, fellow gamers, RPGers. Welcome from my mobile abode in the heartland of America, where it's great to be homeless and making our way in the world. Well, we talk. I've seen a lot of videos over the past week or so talking about what it takes to be a good GM, a good game master. Uh, in my opinion, and I've spent the majority of my gaming experience as a GM. A good GM, or the old days we used to call them DM, is somebody that can adapt to their given situation and to their group of players. Uh, no two groups of people are going to be the same. Sometimes each session's different depending on people's moods and attitudes and how their days or their week had gone. A lot of times, as a GM, we spend an awful lot of time in a little bubble of our own, trying to be creative and to create this environment, this world, this adventure that we're going to allow our friends to join us with. In a way, we're a bit of a storyteller and an artist and a madman. And uh, to make a good GM, in my opinion, it takes the ability to adapt a little bit, because they're not always going to go and do what you expect them to do. If you choose to not try to force the issue, the ability to modify your plans, so to speak, is crucial. You can have a dungeon crawler or the typical dungeon adventure and have it well plotted and planned. And the advantage of doing something like that is if your players decide to go down a unbeaten path that you hadn't planned, you can just kind of skew everything around. So it comes back out to where they end up running into the things you've been planning for all along. So that's part of adaptability. The creativity part comes in with finding a balance of not having too complicated of a backstory, a too in depth, if you will, of a world for your players without getting too bland or too basic. I've played as a player a few times with some GMs, some experienced GMs who lack that I don't want to say common sense versus creativity restraint, but the worlds they created were either so complicated, so complex, with so many things going on that we lose track of the basic concept of what we were there for, and got off onto discussions of neo-politics and religion and just trying to find our way around a labyrinth of a city, unless of course the adventure involves characters needing to do something of that nature, which in and of itself is its own set of requirements and expectations. Uh, the opposite side of that, of course, is a GM who spends absolutely no time working on any kind of backstory or any kind of world, if you will, for the players to operate in. And you don't need to have a really complicated world, but you still need some kind of world, something that you can relate to, the players can relate to, and that you can settle them into. Consistency is a crucial thing, I think. Consistency. So if you're going to create a world for players to play in, develop the effort to create some towns and cities and location, maybe some backstories about why the kings are doing what they're doing, or the various races interact the way they do. Uh, that's a good thing. Keep notes, make yourself a folder, some maps help. Some crib notes for yourself is almost as crucial, especially when it can be, weeks can go by or months can go by in game sessions between the needs to explain some situation, locally speaking, or the dynamics of why a town reacts the way they do when the players show up. Uh, that was something I had to learn the hard way. I made a couple very elaborate worlds that I spent months working on, and then we spent almost no time actually playing with that part of the environment. Uh, you know, I guess you could have whole sessions on world creating, world building. There are books on that subject, source books and stuff. I've got a number of them on my shelf. Most of them are old by today's standards. You know, I'm old by today's standards. You know, so is the overpriced, frickin' copy that I got here in my wonderful temporary abode. You know, no, it's a good thing to be able to entertain people. Like I said, being a little bit of a storyteller. I'm a big fan of modules or adventures or whatever the various terms are, depending on the game system. For a temporary, I've got 5 guys and we want to play a game, or a couple of guys dropped in and a couple of non-regulars are here. Let's just whip up some base characters and run this little campaign. Or I came in and I just had a one of them weeks where he just didn't have time to set up properly. So we can jump into this. Another thing. Now this is one of my personal preferences. I can't speak this for everybody because I've played with GMs who have been on both sides of the coin on this subject. I like a long-term game. I want players to develop over time, their characters to develop over time. This minimum, maximum, or min-max philosophy or mentality that's prevalent today is more of I think, a fallout, if you will, of the video game craze. I like video games. I've played them. Don't get me wrong. I've never owned one. I don't have a Nintendo. I never got an Atari. I didn't have a Sony or an Xbox. I had a PC with some games on those. Of course, those don't seem to want to play on my new laptop because they're way out of date or something, which is a shame. I hate repaying for things. Uh, you know, Problem with the minimum maxes is basically we're playing an arena game. Let's just max out our characters and put them up against maxed out bad guys or monsters and see who's left standing. And you know what? There's times when that's fun. I agree with that. There are times when that's fun. That makes for a good weekend when you really just don't want to get into the same old grind on the story. That's another thing when you're developing your world or coaching your players in adventures is to be careful that you don't become boring, too predictable. You need to be able to a little spontaneity is not a bad thing. Just like allowing your characters or your players' characters to take lead. A good developed character, just like in writing a novel, a good developed character will take on a life of their own. The player themselves are just there to act as the id or the mind behind the body, kind of speak, to give them some direction. But they develop a good personality and they'll have wants and needs and desires of their own. And a good GM will tune into that and modify or create the game environment to suit that, to encourage that side of behavior, because that's where the real fun starts to come into play. It's where we actually get this concept of role playing, where we are slipping into the role of something that we are not normally. Well, that's one of the draws for this game system, or the concept for most people. Difference between the tabletop stuff and as I call it, pen and paper games and the video games and stuff is that you have a lot more control over the personal development of your character. I mean, a lot of things are developing, and a lot of these game systems are developing today, from what I see, to give the creator, the GM, the options of creating an actual, modifiable playing environment, so their fellow players can come in and just play the video game as the guy set it up. And one of these point and click or drag and click kind of things, and that's great. I'm all for that. Eventually, I'd like to see it get even more elaborate. One of the things, though, the real challenges that these people are facing is that personal character development. Character development is more too than just skills and feats and developing what your character's capabilities are based on what its particular chosen profession is. The GMs, in my opinion, at least whenever I was GMing and hope to be GMing again in the near future, uh, is to watch the development of these characters and how they interplay off each other. There's dynamics. You get a couple characters that play off each other, a couple players that can build off each other's characters. Uh, there's no limit to interesting situations and fun. And I've seen entire sessions that I planned for a lot more to be done than what got done because the hijinks between the couple individuals in the group became so entertaining for the whole group that we ran with it. And that's part of the game. That's part of what we're trying to do here is to entertain ourselves and have a good time doing it. You know, uh, it's one of those grand parts of the stuff, and for non-gamers, it's kind of hard. It baffles them. They don't understand the attraction for this sort of thing. This minute control that we have over these characters. I guess that would be a whole other session for itself. Like I said, back to the GMing thing. A good GM doesn't have to have bookcases full of rules and supplements and source books. I'm not discarding any of that stuff because hey, every bit of material is that much more helpful. It's just like a lot of people I notice don't talk about it. I have this favorite system, or they have this favorite system, or this is the thing we're touting. The current fad is this Pathfinder, which I haven't seen myself personally. The differences, the nuances between game systems and their settings versus their player mechanics, actually far closer together than what most people would like to agree on. No offense to the newer systems or in defending the older systems, they all still function, whether you're using D20 or THATCO or Percentile, the D100, it doesn't really matter. The ease and mechanics you can make an argument do, and I'll agree with that to some degree. They say THATCO's a bit more complicated. You got to do back math, and you're not if you're not careful. I disagree with that to some degree. I think it's what they call that a Pavlovian reflex. Excuse me if I'm not pronouncing it properly. We develop this ability to automatically just be able to make the rolls. The good players, the good GMs, time that you spend time, doesn't matter what system you get, you learn to adjust to it. And if necessary, you have a little crib note there that helps you fly with it. The other side of the GM there, if your players' rolls are lousy or they're just overly complicated for them and they get frustrated, fudge it. Fudge it. I mean, you know, guy's having a bad day of rolls and everything he does goes south and he's getting frustrated. Adjust the damned base. That's one of the advantages of being the GM, sitting there behind your screen, behind your, with your little stack of notebooks and source books and extra dice, and constantly tossing a few rolls, tossing a few rolls, and being nothing. And the players get nervous and what do what was that for? And say, oh, yeah, I'm just checking on something. Well, that's the ability to interfere occasionally when things just things are slowing or bogging down the game, or you got a one player that's getting particularly frustrated, and it's because he's just getting poor rolls. Now, there's plenty of argument that says that's part of the game. You take it, you leave it, good, bad, okay. But if it's ruining the fun, make some adjustments. That's part of being a good GM, I think. Uh, it's easy to make a world and develop it in detail. It's hard to mediate, which is what a GM really is. You're not God. You're not playing God. You're not playing, the great developer. You're the mediator between the players and the NPCs. As a matter of fact, I've had some pretty interesting games where the NPCs got into arguments with the other NPCs with the players present. And that can get a little interesting from the GM's perspective because, running 4 or 5, the player only runs one character, maybe two, the guy's talented or you're using a small group. I guess that's another topic for some other day. The other hand, where the GM has a dozen or half dozen NPCs on the table, and one of them does something ignorant, or one of the players uses some creative trick to cause one NPC to interfere with another. How would that really work? How do you deal with that? I've had orcs, and the nature of orcs are violent if you go by the basic canon, where especially against each other. So if one player manages to trick one orc into attacking another orc, and he doesn't outright kill the other orc, hey, I make a roll. Next thing I know, the orcs are fighting each other, and the players are just kind of helping out. Or players are slipping away because the orcs outnumbered them and they were in bad shape. But now the orcs are really fighting over the supposed loot they're going to get from these bodies that ain't dead yet. That's creative GMing right there. It's a good thing to think about, folks, and a good time for me to leave on that note. So, until next time.